All right. So we have a story here about cancer and the environment. This is in these times. Cancer is an environmental problem. This is by Anita Karaher. Why federal funding for cancer research must examine its human-made causes. Quote, in my experience, the attitude of most clinicians and cancer researchers is that environmental causes of cancer are not very important. That was certainly my attitude. This was how doctor and cancer researcher Margaret Kripke began her presentation at the Cancer and Environment Forum in March. The forum, held jointly by several major U.S. cancer research centers, was meant to inform practicing clinicians about the everyday exposures that can increase a person's likelihood of developing cancer. My outlook on this subject changed very dramatically when I was a member of the president's cancer panel, said Kripke, who served on the panel in 2010. That year, the panel produced its first ever report on environmental causes of cancer. He continued, what I learned from this exercise was absolutely shocking to me. That 2010 report found that environmental exposure plays a larger role in cancer formation than once believed by clinicians, and that these cancer risks are especially dangerous to children. Since then, researchers have narrowed their estimate. 70 to 90% of cancer development is driven by non-genetic environmental factors. These can be factors like smoking or diet, but as Kripke and her colleagues are focused on, also things like air quality and repetitive exposure to chemicals used in workplaces and homes. In February of this year, President Joe Biden announced the relaunching of Cancer Moonshot, a funding initiative he originally spearheaded while vice president in 2016. The relaunch aims to gain congressional support around the goal of cutting cancer death rates in the United States in half in the next 25 years. The role of environmental risk factors is being acknowledged in that effort. The relaunching included the information of an advisory cancer cabinet, which includes representatives from agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency and the Food and Drug Administration. In his March State of the Union address, Biden acknowledged the probable role that toxic smoke from military burn pits played in his own son's cancer, and announced a Veterans Affairs rule, streamlining access to medical care for veterans with cancers that research has linked to these pits. But in the president's proposed 2023 budget, no funds were earmarked for the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, the leading agency in researching environmental cancer risks, responsible for breakthroughs in toxicology research methods. Its parent agency, the National Institutes of Health, which houses 27 other institutes and centers, including NIEHS, only received an overall $275 million increase in discretionary funding in the proposed budget. Ruth N. Rudell of the Silent Spring Institute, a breast cancer research center that receives NIEHS funding, says that money for research on environmental causes of cancer is sorely needed. The studies are complex, requiring large samples of participants, followed for years at a time to understand the consequences of being exposed. A difficulty in performing this research is that basic information about potential carcinogens is missing. Kripke, who serves on the Silent Spring Institution's board of directors, attributes this lack of information to the underregulation of the industries that produce these chemicals in the first place. Quote, we in this country operate on the basis of something called the reactionary principle for chemical production. Kripke explains, if it causes harm, then we regulate it or remove it from the marketplace. But proving harm in the absence of regulation can be an uphill battle. That's the challenge that the community of East Oakland, California faced. At the end of last year, Communities for a Better Environment, in an environmental justice group, sued a local facility, AB&I Foundry, over its emission of hexavalent chromium, a known carcinogen. While residents have been vocal about the high rates of health issues in their community, the lawsuit against the foundry was only possible after the passage of a local air quality district rule that required the district to assess all the health risks posed by the entire facility rather than only the parts being regulated. That assessment found that the largest cancer risk AB&I Foundry produced was hexavalent chromium pollution being vented into the atmosphere. The machinery that produces the hexavalent chromium was exempt from permitting at the time of installation, and thus its pollution had never been officially tracked. Until this, the only carcinogenic pollution officially being monitored from the foundry was lead. Esther Goolsby, an organizer with CBE, says that even though she has lived near the foundry for the past 30 years, she was not aware of what she and her neighbors were being exposed to until she joined CBE. Quote, and knowing only when I got older what was there and reflecting just on how it affects my children when growing up, and then all of the community that were there. And there are 2 elementaries and a library. So thinking about how long this has been going on, and we're only just now getting action. The Air Quality District's assessment would have been the first step in a multi-year process of bringing all of AB&I Foundry's operations into regulation. Tyler Earle, a lawyer for CBE, says that the organization was pushing for the foundry to install abatement technology on the machinery to reduce its pollution. Instead, in March of this year, AB&I Foundry announced that it would be moving its entire operation to Texas. CBE did not interpret this as a win. Goolsby's response was, quote, "In Texas, they're just going to go to another community and put toxins there." AB&I Foundry cited increasing regulatory standards for its move. Earle said that the decision underscored the importance of a just transition for workers at facilities such as this, where the communities, particularly the Black and brown folks who surround industrial facilities, have been paying the price for companies' profit. And that's another element of this, you guys, is that communities that have the most pollution are often poor communities and communities of color. So the cancer rates being higher in those communities could have something to do with some of these environmental factors. So part of what is important in this story to me is I think it's an example of how there's intersection among all of these issues, right? We covered earlier the farm workers in California from More Perfect Union and how the wildfires are affecting them. So there's now two ways here that we've talked about today that the climate crisis is intersecting with other issues. It's affecting people's health. It's affecting people's work lives. It's affecting, burning people's homes down and coasts are going to be underwater and all this kind of thing. So the ways that these issues all kind of intersect with each other is very important. And I think having a worldview that sort of accepts that and puts that first and foremost, I think is very important. So this is a great piece there from In These Times. And obviously, it's very important to get to the bottom of what is causing cancer and other deadly diseases that are very prominent and that kill a lot of people. And it's hardly surprising that environmental factors are among them. And also, you guys, there's the capitalism element to this too, right? Companies are going to put their profit above the well-being of these communities. So when a chemical company or an oil company goes and essentially poisons the air or water that people are breathing and drinking, they are doing so for profit. And that dynamic is important also to put first and foremost, right? So excellent reporting there from In These Times. And I encourage everybody to take the climate crisis seriously and encourage everybody to take the corporate abuse that is an organic result of our capitalist economic structure very seriously. I hope that there is increased funding for these programs, you guys. I mean, if Biden's serious about that, he's one of these people where if it affects him, he might actually do a tiny little bit about it. So the fact that his kid died of cancer and had potentially been affected by this kind of environmental factor, perhaps he will find within him the empathy that everybody always likes to talk about and actually provide some funding for this program. I'm not naive enough to expect it, but one can hope, right? One can hope.